Good morning, Oklahoma, and welcome to Cow-Calf Corner. Our topic this week follows up our topic last week, in which we talked about what to expect from your butcher steer that you finished out. What that led to was, what do we expect to take home relative to specific cuts from the beef carcass, and a couple other questions that we'll get to. So first of all, as you see in the diagram on screen, of the four major wholesale cuts that come from a beef carcass, the round loin ribbon chuck, the chuck or shoulder region is going to be a little over 25%. We're typically going to get a lot of roast and stew meat from that particular cut. The round is usually around 22 to 24% of that carcass, and the ribbon loin collectively are the back meats and really of a lot of interest, because that's where our really great steaks come from. T-bones, KC strips, ribeye steaks, things like that. But the ribbon loin collectively, on average, are a little under 27% of the carcass. Now, the rest of what we take home is going to be things like brisket, short plate, the flank, the shanks. They're all small percentages of the carcass, as you can see from the diagram. So that gives you a rough feel for the approximate percentages that you're going to take home of each thing. Second question, and we had a lot of varieties of this question, is we all want more steaks. Steaks are those premium cuts that come from a beef carcass, those muscles in the back that are really low in connective tissue, and really what drive the value of a beef carcass based on the amount of marbling that's in there. And if we are selling a butcher beef or a fed animal, often the big driver of the value of that carcass. In reality, we know the ribbon loin are going to be about 26.8% of the weight, or the hot carcass weight, but how many actual cuts of steak are we going to get? Now this becomes interesting. Typically we say probably around 2 dozen ribeye steaks, around 2 dozen T-bones or strip loins, but this really starts to vary. It depends on how we want the carcass cut up. A T-bone steak, for example, could be separated out into a strip loin as well as a fillet. It also depends a great deal on how thick we want our steaks cooked. Most consumers prefer a steak that is between 3/4 of an inch to 1.5 inches thick. Obviously, with that 26.8% of our carcass that comes from the ribbon loin, the thickness of those steaks is going to have a dramatic impact on how many steaks we actually take home. So give consideration to that. Third big question that we had is how much fat to leave on the carcass. The first thing I would say, fat is a good thing with regard to taste. The perception of tenderness, the juiciness and flavor that we get from cuts of beef, fat is going to be a driver of that. It's going to contribute to that. If we leave more fat on the carcass, it's actually going to lead to less evaporative loss through the aging process. If we leave more fat on the carcass, it's going to increase the expected yield and the amount of take-home product that we get. But trimming off more fat, while it might take away from the amount of yield that we get from the carcass, is also going to mean that's less external cover we have to trim off at home. With regard to this topic, I always say go for an optimum. If I'm having ground beef made, I like an 80-20 mix. If I think about a ground beef patty, something I'm going to cook on the grill, once that is ground up, that 20% fat that is actually in that burger breaks down just like marbling does in a steak and leads to a very satisfying eating experience. I encourage you, if you're having a steer or heifer carcass processed, talk to your meat packer, talk about the cutting specs, exchange some information, and have a dialogue. You're going to find your packers want you to be satisfied with what you take home, perhaps even after they've looked at that carcass and have a feel for it. They're going to be able to offer some information that's going to help guide you through the cutting specs that you give them, which often I believe will lead to a more satisfying eating experience once you get home. Hope this helps, and look forward to seeing you again next week on Cow-Calf Corner. Thanks for joining us.